Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we unleash the truth of Genesis.
And ask questions that evolutionists still have a hard time answering.
Welcome back to Genesis Unleashed. Today we're doing question number 5. Question 5 in the 15 questions flyer. These are 15 questions for evolutionists, questions that scientists, that are scientists anyway, creation science, Bible-believing scientists, believe are significant, serious questions for evolutionists.
That haven't been answered adequately.
So this flyer was put together by one of our scientists. He actually has a PhD in biology, and reviewed by other scientists. So it's not just, you know, run-of-the-mill Bible-thumping questions that you might get. Question 5.
Okay.
That's what we're on. I'll just read it from the flyer here. How did new biochemical pathways, which involve multiple enzymes working together in sequence, originate? Now, here's the detail on the question. Every pathway and nanomachine requires multiple protein/enzyme components to work. How did lucky accidents create even one of the components, let alone 10 or 20 or 30 plus at the same time, often in a necessary programmed sequence? Evolutionary biochemist Franklin Harold wrote, "We must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations." That's the question, and you can have a look at creation.com/motor for some details on that question, on how serious that question really is.
Right. And so we got some responses.
Yes,
some people
as
trying
we
to
always
answer the
do.
question, and feedback from the website, etc. So here's answer number 1. There's no reason to think that the first life was as complex as today's. The simplest forms would be extinct by now, outcompeted by the more complex modern forms. A self-replicator can be as simple as a strand of 6 DNA nucleotides. These self-replicators set the stage for evolution to begin, whether or not you call these molecules life. So that was the first answer we got.
Okay, and it's not like we haven't heard that before. Life was simpler in the past.
Right, and it could be very simple, etc., etc. Of course, our response to that is there any documentation for that? Is there any evidence? Is there any hard science that you can show us to prove that? Because hard science actually indicates that the simplest life that we can study today is incredibly complex because of what life entails. Simply to have a living thing, it's incredibly complex. So unless you can actually show us some hard evidence, you're basically giving us a just so story of how you think it must have been, but you don't have any evidence, which means it's not really science. It's just wishful thinking. And if you want some idea of how complex the simplest life form could be, go to creation.com/simple. Got an excellent article on there just as to how complex it would have to be even living.
Right, and evolutionists, creationists aren't the only ones that are pointing this out. Of course, evolutionists know full well that life is complex. For example, in the January 2006 Nature, that's volume 439, on pages 246 and 247, research led by Hamilton Smith at the J. Craig Venter Institute reveals that the minimum genome consists of 387 protein coding and 43 RNA coding genes.
Right.
This is not a creationist think tank.
Right.
These are evolutionists, and they're saying that life is incredibly complex.
That's as simple as it can get.
As simple as it can get.
According to what we know.
Yes. And if we imagine, let's bring it down to something that maybe we can understand a little bit. If we imagine, if we want to build a machine,
right,
the self-replicating machine to simulate life, how simple could we make it?
Right.
What's the simplest possible machine that you could build that before it broke down, it would be able to get parts, the parts necessary to make a copy of itself, assemble them in the right sequence, have programming, and then transmit that programming to the new machine so that it could go on and make more copies of itself. How simple would a device like that be?
No one's ever been able to do it.
No.
brilliant scientists on the planet have not been able to create what they call a Van Neumann machine. That was a German scientist who tried to figure out what it would take for a machine to replicate itself, to build a machine to do everything you just described
Oh,
there.
okay. I didn't even realize that was a real scenario.
Oh, yeah.
But,
And of
it
course,
seems completely impossible without a whole lot of design and programming and all kinds of directed effort.
Even with all that, they still haven't been able to do it. With all the intelligence of all of our scientists that have ever been on the planet, no one's been able to do that.
Not
the other thing
surprising.
is, not only if you want evolution to happen, there's got to be built-in variation within that machine that you just talked about, even for natural selection to occur, let alone evolution.
If we're talking about real life, if the machine as an analogy of a real cell, cells have programming that allow them to adapt to varying different environments.
Right. So for more on claims of self-replicating molecules or peptides, enzymes, see self-replicating enzymes, a critique of some current evolutionary origin of life models. That's another article on our website. You just go to creation.com/replicating, and you'll see that article there, and see that it's not as simple as as the person who put in the answer makes it seem. So. Let's go to answer number 2.
Okay, another response?
Yeah. Looking at the biochemical processes in detail at a moment in time does not indicate the evolutionary history of an organism. Scaffolding is a means to develop a process. Furthermore, evolution is established on the macroscopic level through morphology, as well as on the molecular level with genetics. As the understanding of biochemistry proceeds, as it is a much younger science, a better understanding will develop. Furthermore, as Michael Behe learned at the Dover trial, there's a lot known about the evolution of proteins, such as with the immune system. So actually several things put into one answer here. Several points. So we're going to need to break that down so everybody can understand what the skeptic was actually saying.
Okay, so what he was saying is that, or she, what the responder was saying is that evolution, you can't look at a point in time. You have to look on the large scale,
right.
The similarities in design and living things, similarities in morphology, and look at the small scale, similarities in DNA.
Right.
That's what he was getting at.
Yep.
So there's an inconsistency with that argument on both levels. Supposedly, well, we know that all life uses DNA, so then in an evolutionary sense, the ancestor of all life should also use DNA.
If you're going to have similarity.
The way this person's going with this argument. But the proposed ancestor for all life, evolutionists' own story, they say, well, it didn't start with DNA.
Right, DNA is too complex, so it must have started with something simpler, even though we don't have any sample of that.
The RNA world or things like that.
Right.
And on a large scale, take tetrapods, for example. That's a vertebrate with 4 limbs. They say, well, all tetrapods have this 5-digit configuration on their limbs.
Right.
And so then obviously the ancestor of all tetrapods, something that came out of the sea millions of years ago, also had these things, the common ancestor of this particular design. Mm-hmm. But the common ancestors that are usually put up, there's Acanthostega and Ichthyostega. Acanthostega had 8 digits, while Ichthyostega had 7. And all of these, including Tiktaalik, which is a more recent example, all of those have been overthrown by even more recent fossil evidence.
And if you're looking for similarities even, I mean, we have similar structures. For example, us and frogs, we'll have like 5 digits here.
Right.
But the humans, we have programmed cell death in between our digits when we're being formed in our mother's womb. That's how we get these 5 digits. But frogs, they actually have these little limb buds that
it's like sprouts
that
grow out of
come out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2 completely different programs resulting in a similar structure, easy to explain by an intelligent designer, a common designer, using different methods, but hard for evolution to explain in that way. One of his points is that scaffolding, this is an argument that Lewontin and Gould made in '79, that would be a mechanism for evolution, and I should explain that a little bit. For example, one of the arguments for design is that some of the things that we see inside living things are irreducibly complex. You would have to have all the structures in place at once in order for them to function properly, et cetera, et cetera. And so what our evolutionists have argued with is this scaffolding idea. Take, for example, an archway. You see a beautiful stone building, it's got stone arches over the doors or the windows. And those arches, if you've ever seen one put together or put one together, you need to create a scaffolding first. Because as you place these stones for the archway in place, they'll just fall down.
Right.
It's only when you
something
have
to hold them up.
Yeah, that like last keystone drops into place and then the weight gets put out, and then it's safe to take your scaffolding out. So this is what evolutionists were arguing. No. Evolution created some kind of scaffold, and then evolution evolved some kind of structure, and then evolution took away this structure, and then that's how you get it.
Right.
Basically, this argument has gone nowhere since 1979. Evolutionists have not been able to show any evidence for anything like that occurring. So again, it's a just so story, and it's missing the point again. When you see, a stonemason doing that, he's doing so because of intelligent design, because he knows what the end product he wants.
Right, there's a goal in mind.
There's a goal in mind, and he creates a specific structure, which is itself an intelligently designed structure, so that you can create the other structure, and so it's just a really bad argument.
And after the archway is there, there's no evidence for the scaffolding.
Right.
And so I guess it'd be difficult for evolutionists to come up with evidence. I mean, if it used to be there, but it's not there today.
Well, yeah, now your absence of evidence is evidence that...
Yeah, it does. Not really a good argument. No. Okay, here's another rebuttal to this particular very long statement.
Yeah, because we're going through them here. There's a lot of assertions here, but we're taking them one by one.
4 major points. Here's the third point. He's or the skeptic is appealing to prophecy.
Yes, prophetic
saying,
appeal.
Well, our understanding of the biochemical process, as it is a much younger science, a better understanding will develop. Well, that means that evolutionists don't have an answer now.
Right, and we're confident in the future. We're going to predict, we're going to prophesy that in the future we will know the answers, but we don't know them now. So you're actually...
We've said this already. Generally, people who aren't Christians are opposed to predictive prophecy, right. But I guess when it suits your story...
Yeah. And point number 4 that was made was citing the outcome of the Dover ID versus evolution trial. It is quite curious, since the judge that actually proceeded in those trials was not a scientist, had no scientific training whatsoever. And if you go to our article, creation.com/NAS, N-A-S, you're going to see our detailed analysis of the Dover trial, and you're going to see some very curious and kind of underhanded things were actually happening during that.
There were some weird things happening at that trial, but
yes.
to reference it as to try to make a point in this area is probably not a good idea if you're an evolutionist.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the third answer that was given to this particular question. Right. It's not a lucky accident.
Period.
Period. That was it. Or exclamation mark.
Yep.
And our response to that is, it's either a lucky accident or it's designed.
What else can it be?
What else can it be? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's either by chance or it's designed.
Right. Now, I think what the skeptic might have been trying to say, although they didn't explain themselves, is that people like Richard Dawkins would say that no, natural selection isn't just random chance, because obviously the better variants get chosen, by the environment, et cetera, and so it's actually a guided process. It's a random guided process, so to speak.
Yes, and that's probably where this guy was going, although it's not worded that way.
Yeah, the problem is if you look at the actual question here, what we're talking about needing to be in place, all of these things have to be in place before selection can occur. So you can't really invoke natural selection here until you have these specific, biochemical pathways, et cetera, et cetera. They're not going to come about. So you've either got chance or design, and that's really not a good.
The science comes down on the side of design very strongly.
Right.
So if you go to the website, creation.com/15 questions to look up all the 15 questions, and spend some time on creation.com. Educate yourself and have a look at what creationists actually believe. You'll find that the evidence for creation is very powerful, and the evidence then for the accuracy and authority of the Bible comes right out of that. The Bible's history is true. We were created, we didn't evolve. Of wishful speculations. That's the question. And you can have a look at creation.com/motor for some details on that question, on how serious that question really is.
Right. And so we got some responses.
Yes,
some people trying to answer the question, and feedback from the website, etc. So here's answer number 1. There's no reason to think that the first life was as complex as today's. The simplest forms would be extinct by now, outcompeted by the more complex modern forms.
Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we unleash the truth of Genesis
and ask questions that evolutionists still have a hard time answering. Haven't been answered
Yeah.
adequately.
So this flyer was put together by one of our scientists. He actually has a PhD in biology, and reviewed by other scientists. So it's not just, run-of-the-mill Bible-thumping questions that you might get. Question 5.
Okay.
That's what we're on. I'll just read it from the flyer here. How did new biochemical pathways, which involve multiple enzymes working together in sequence, originate? Now, here's the detail on the question. Every pathway and nanomachine require... Welcome back to Genesis Unleashed. Today we're doing question number 5. Question 5 in the 15 questions flyer. These are 15 questions for evolutionists, questions that scientists, that are scientists anyway, creation science, Bible-believing scientists, believe are significant, serious questions for evolutionists. There's multiple protein/enzyme components to work. How did lucky accidents create even one of the components, let alone 10 or 20 or 30 plus at the same time, often in a necessary programmed sequence? Evolutionary biochemist Franklin Harold wrote, "We must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular system, only a variety